This is Rebecca Jernigan, your tour guide into discoveries, coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, satellite, and podcast. Let's journey together into the realms of the known to the unknown in search of enlightenment, knowledge, and truth.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet Earth. This is your host, Tobias B. Harrell, and you're listening to Journeys with Rebecca, right here on wolfspiritradio.com and being simulcast every week on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com Studio B. Some of the usual programming reminders for you tonight. We look forward to taking some of your questions later in the show. Please remember to put them in all capital letters in the chat room so that they are easier to see, and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the second hour tonight. I would also like to remind you that both Revolution Radio and Wolf Spirit Radio are listener supported, and I really urge you to give them a donation, big or small. It all matters to ensure that you get the best of continued programming to complement and enhance your lives. Yes, it does. Tonight, Rebecca will be away for a few short weeks, and I have the honor of being your host as we move toward the remaining weeks of 2017. As Rebecca takes time to get fixed up from some things that are affecting her health, I ask you and remind Rebecca that she is always in our hearts, and we look forward to her return. In the meantime, I look forward to the time I spend with all of you and some absolutely incredible guests. And speaking of guests, tonight we had scheduled Maureen St. Germaine.
Oh, we got her. Uh-oh.
And even though it's the final moment, JP just advised that we've got Maureen on the line, so I'll just continue this introduction. Again, it's my privilege to be able to spend time with Maureen St. Germaine tonight. Maureen is an amazing lady. She describes herself as a practical mystic. She has guided people towards personal development and spiritual awakening for 25 years. On the 12th of September, her much-awaited book, Waking Up in 5D, A Practical Guide to Multidimensional Transformation, was released. As a seeker, Maureen shares the knowledge and experiences that she has gained from all of her years of study into ancient mysteries and the truths behind them. I'm very, 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 very excited that Maureen is here tonight. But before we start, I just wanted to also thank in advance someone who most of you already know and appreciate, the man behind the curtain with his fingers on the controls. He has the power to broadcast and the power to silence at his fingertips. Thank you, JP, for being here as you always have been.
Fascinating.
So much power in one man's hands, JP. I don't know how you can stand it.
So much power and so few fingers to operate it. Anyway, I was trying to do this.
Fascinating.
And isn't that a great one?
Well, I am all about the sound effects, and, it never ceases to amaze me how easy they just appear, JP.
That sound effect was a clip from the Tomorrow People. And the Tomorrow People is very much like what, it wasn't out of context, you see. It's very out of, it was a show from the 1970s, I remember, when I was a kid. And, it was kids who had telepathy, telekinesis, and teleportation. And, wow. It was about like a little group of them, helping out the other groups and helping out humanity and, fighting for humanity, for the things that they can pick up that other people couldn't. So anyway, it was all connected. Good night. I'll step back now.
That's
behind the curtain. I will be. See you later, master.
With his fingers at the controls. Well, that's fantastic. Actually, on that topic, the Tomorrow People, you said in the 70s, it's interesting because The Tomorrow People was a TV series that came out a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago here in Canada.
Yeah. There was a version made. It's not the same one, but it was based on the
Okay.
same idea.
Right. It was fantastic. It didn't run too long, but I will never forget it because it seemed like a lot of those things sort of reflected some things that I'd experienced in my life or lifetimes. Do. Anyways, thank you, JP. I always appreciate you being here. It makes me feel good, I assure you. Anyways, Maureen St. Germaine is my guest, our guest. I'm very privileged to meet you, Maureen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What a treat.
Oh, yeah, this is definitely going to be a lot of fun. I did not know you would be my guest tonight until later today, but it is just a privilege. I've looked at some of your website and some information about the things that you've been doing. And let me just verify that you had released your book in last month, was it?
That is correct.
Okay, good.
I said that.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you've had quite a story. So why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about how it really began for you?
I've been in the esoteric work as long as I can remember. And when I was a child, I grew up Catholic, but I always had awareness of things that weren't necessarily knowable by traditional senses. I have a childhood story where I had discovered a book called The Lives of the Saints that my mother had in a bookcase. And it was a beautiful gold gilded book, and it was maybe 5 inches thick. It was quite thick and heavy. And I kept pulling it out to read. And one day it wasn't where it was supposed to be. And I went to the bookcase, and when it wasn't there, I thought, well, I wonder where it went. And then I knew. So I got a chair and went into the closet where it was, and it was on a very high shelf. And I pulled it down and I did my reading, and then I put it back in the bookcase where it belonged. And my mother never hid it after that.
That's fantastic. You had an inner knowing, huh?
Yes. Well, it was simply a matter of asking the question, and the answer just was in my head immediately.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, and my path began, I raised a family and I worked at corporate world, so I have a lot of connections with a lot of people in their, what they've encountered in life. And at the same time, then I also, led study groups and things like that. And I kind of joke around that at a certain point I came out of the closet as a spiritual teacher and began, publicly teaching. And, throughout that whole cycle, I found that I could ask for information and get it. And so also could my students. I attribute a lot of that to my own spiritual devotion and study. So I was studying the materials I was teaching, and then that material was teaching me, if that makes sense. And one of the things that I developed was a tool for a person to be able to connect with their higher self and get 100% accuracy. And then I developed other tools and began working in the Akashic Records. I was told I was being given a permanent guide. And when I asked why wasn't that information coming directly through me, I was told, well, I have this thing about aggrandizement and people puffing themselves up. And so I had to hear it from someone outside of myself because I wouldn't have believed it otherwise. And because of that, I have been able to tap into information that is available for all of us, but for whatever reason, I'm able to bring it in. So part of what I'm about these days is helping people step into their own power. I feel like it's my job to teach you how powerful you are and to teach you the tools that I use to have accuracy, to connect with your Akashic Records, to connect with your guides, and then also be proactive. And as I began to notice, there were certain things that happened to me that made me realize that I was being super sensitive to things that normally people wouldn't object to. And it first came about with words, and I noticed certain words would trigger me. And these weren't bad words. They weren't, the words that you get your mouth washed up with soap for. These were just everyday words that people used, but they were very polarized. And as I began to examine this, then I had this big aha that this whole transition was going to come about in a way that was different than what a lot of people were saying. And that the transition would be us evolving up and then sliding back down, evolving up and sliding back down. And my biggest aha came when I was telling my mother about one of my sons. And I have 4 sons. And one of the sons was, the one that always challenged me, not challenging me, but challenging the system. It was kind of fearless. And I was telling her how he'd done something really mature, and I was so proud of him. And she said, well, kids don't grow up in a straight line. And I was naive enough to say, what does that mean? And she laughed and said, well, when they do something mature, they'll usually follow it with something really stupid. And of course, in hindsight, I can laugh about it. They're grown and out of the house. But at the time, it really set me back. But that's us. Each of us makes some maturity. We make some progress. Then we slide back a little bit. Then we make some more progress, and then we slide back a little. And one time when I was teaching a group of people, and it included some men that had studied the stock market using sacred geometry, they said to me, that's the same chart of change we use. So these day traders were using this concept of forward movement, backward movement, forward movement, backward movement, in a way that showed upward progression without necessarily being a straight line. That it was always moving in a jagged vantage point, from a jagged basis.
It's always fascinating when you can take one example from your life and then you get sort of confirmations from other aspects or other people or other groups and influences, and it's sort of the same modalities, so to speak. It's the same sort of blueprint, the way things work. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's fascinating. I would like to sort of rewind you a little bit and take you back more to the beginning. There's a lot of information there. It's fantastic. But I'm curious. I always like to sort of investigate, sort of delve into, where people come from and the experiences they had around it. Because I think, and I'm sure you've experienced this throughout your practices and your teaching, that people pick up a lot fuller, a more robust sort of view of the teachings and different information that way, right? So I'm curious, the people around you when you were younger, I mean, did they, first of all, what influences from your family, from Catholicism? You said religion, television, school, these things. Did others around you experience similar things when they could, you said you could have access, immediate answers. Was this always the case? Or what were the influences? What were the experiences back then for you from the other people?
Well, I grew up on a farm. We never went anywhere. And the only place we ever went was Sunday church. We had a TV, but as children we weren't allowed to watch it except for a few hours on Sunday afternoon. So I didn't have a lot of influences except the books I was reading. And I already, when other kids might be reading comic books or kids books, I'm reading the lives of the saints. So I was influenced. And I will tell you, even as a child, I was aware of beings monitoring me. And some were beings that were looking after me in a benevolent way, and some weren't. And I was also extraordinarily sensitive. So my biggest influence was, I was one of 6 children, and I was the middle child. And if my older brother said something, he could upset me in a heartbeat. I was a bit of an odd duck, I like to sing myself to sleep, but I got in trouble for that because it was keeping somebody else awake. And my mother was also very intuitive and had a number of experiences involving our family where she knew things. And so I think, and my father also had a gift, but he didn't really talk about it very much. So I think they were extremely tolerant of my oddness, if you will. And yet I was very normal in lots of other ways. For example, as a child, I wanted to do the things that a lot of kids do. Like I wanted to twirl a baton, but we were farm people and we didn't do that. We didn't take lessons. So when I was a freshman in high school, I decided I was going to use everything I had in my power to convince my mom that I was going to try out. At this point, I had not ever picked up a stick or a baton to twirl. And I thought all day long on how I was going to convince her. And I walked in the house and my mother looked at me and said, if you still want to take baton lessons, I would be okay with that. I never had to ask. It was wild. Yeah. So I had a very loving environment. As a child, when we wanted to do something that my father didn't want us to do, he would say to us, everybody's not doing it. That would be the typical thing. But Dad, everybody's doing it, right? And he would say, well, actually, everybody's not doing it because you're not doing it. And you're not doing it because you're special. Pretty tough to argue with that one.
There's no argument within that, is there? It's fascinating. The lives of the saints. Tell me, it's a book. Tell me what you learned from that. What were the first, eye-opening stories or the first eye-opening story or information that you got from that? And how did you parallel it into your life?
Well, I will be honest with you and tell you that content-wise, I understood from reading these things that the saints led lives of devotion, adversity, and heroic achievement. So I was particularly impressed by the saints that had encountered difficulties and then got past them.
Right. And it's interesting. Did you when I think about different stories, a lot of the ancient stories, some of the, the stories in books such as this, some of the biblical stories, some stories, they very much strike me as real people, obviously. They strike me as people that are not so different from us, but the way they talk about things such as miracles and higher mind abilities and different things, really sort of parlay. For me, they parlay into our lives now when we're talking about things with different verbiage, when we're talking about things as psychic abilities or intuition and meditation. You just spoke about devotion. Well, devotion is a form of meditation, and faith, right? Adversity. I think that obviously we all have our own adversity, that we have to come over. So what within the stories that you read in that book and maybe other things or other places did you really latch on to as, okay, maybe I can do this myself. Maybe this is about me. Maybe this isn't just an old story about a saint or someone else that was devoted. Maybe this is a story that reflects my life now.
I actually never thought that. I have been motivated from the inside more than any other influence. And that inside motivation was to help people. And, reading about the saints only made me aspire in my devotion. I never made an attempt to become plugged in to God. I never made an attempt to have the gifts. What happened in my case is the devotion came first, and then the gifts followed. And that's why I always didn't want to, go out and tell everybody, I'm doing this or this or this. It's the other way around. So it is the devotion to the divine and the desire to serve and help humanity that puts me where I'm at so that I can help others learn and study and grow. And for them to know that anybody can. And there's a sense of will. When I was in college, I was dating a man that I brought home for my parents to meet, and they disapproved of him because of his skin color. And my father threatened to disown me if I continued to see this man. and they convinced me to move away. And so I transferred to a different school, and I was horribly depressed because I couldn't imagine not being connected to my parents. So my father successfully pulled the card, that would make me choose what he wanted me to choose. But at the same time, I was just beside myself with grief. And I asked my angels in my own prayer work, what could I do that would help me pull myself out of this, because I was so unhappy. And they told me, think of 2 positives for every negative. And so I began to do that. And I began to do that with the people that I was now seeing and meeting and getting to know. And within 5 or 6 weeks of arriving at this new college, the head of admissions came to me and said, I want you to take all the new students. I've heard about you. And basically what would happen is somebody would complain about the food, and I'd say, yeah, but the donuts are great, and this and this. So I was always following the rule that my angels had given me, for every negative to follow with 2 positives. So it was really, the experiences that gave me loss that I then turned into an opportunity. And when I told my mother what I was doing, she said, talk about the blind leading the blind. And all I could do was laugh, it's true. And this business of the higher self connection is really important. And I was working in the corporate world and working with a lot of people who are very analytical, very linear in their thinking. And here I am, a person that has a big love of numbers, a big love of math, but I'm also plugged in and very intuitive. And so I asked for the logical reason to always follow your higher self. The logical reason to always follow that inner wisdom. And the answer came through, and I burst out laughing when the answer came through, and it took me 3 months of asking for that answer every time I went into meditation, every day. And the answer is kind of funny when you think about it, because what I was shown is that back in the day when we would watch a movie on the television, it was always the local network. It wasn't like a Netflix or a cable station. And if the weather were odd, like there was a thunderstorm or a hailstorm or a tornado or something that, wasn't really in the picture when they gave the weather report in the morning, they would interrupt the regular programming with a weather report and an update. And you'd know to move your car or close your windows of your house or whatever, take some precautionary steps. So what they showed me was that when your higher self comes in with information for you, it's an update on situation normal. Just like the weatherman gives you an update on the weather in the middle of a movie.
It's a special report.
Isn't that cool?
It's
and
fantastic.
it's so funny and so cool, because then of course we want to follow it. And the thing is, the way I teach it, for example, I give people a protocol. It's a very simple protocol, and it's fun. It's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to be playful and like fool around with it and be in a joyful place with it. And then after 6 weeks, you have a level of accuracy that you can rely on, and you have a level of experience. And understand that, I consider the ego part of the personality. So there's Eastern traditions, for example, that say, the ego, once the ego gets out of it's like a can of worms. You can't get it back, and it's a big problem, and you must subdue the ego. And my thinking was always, no, let's make the ego the partner. And so I look at the ego and I say, how do you make a decision? Most people make a decision based upon what they know. And then you can ask, well, but what else do you use when you make a decision? And the answer is, well, what other people tell you. But how do they know? And well, it's their experiences. So ultimately, the way people know things is through history. And so the way you know the future is you look at the history and you use that as a form of prediction. And once you put your arms around that, even logic is a form of prediction, you can kind of unhook from the demand of the scientific method that insists that you follow only logic, because logic's only a form of prediction, and we all know from chaos theory and other scientific facts that it only takes one aberration to change a whole system, and everything is different anyway. So then you begin to understand that if you could develop a protocol, a practice, like shooting hoops, when you're playing at the foul line and throwing balls at the basketball hoop, you're not counting the ones that don't go in. You're just looking at the ones that make it. And how did that feel? And so that's how we do the practice with the higher self. We play around. We don't ask about anything important. And, if you're really eyeballing that box of bonbons, then just you eat one. You don't ask your higher self. It's only if you're willing to not eat one that you ask. Or when you're getting dressed, higher self. Is it my highest best good to wear the white shirt? No. Higher self, is my highest best good to wear the red shirt? Yes. And that's the day you spill ketchup. So you have all these experiences, and then there's something along the way that gives you a piece of information that shows you that even though you couldn't see it, your higher self knew a benefit. And what happens is, at the end of that 6 weeks period, your higher self and your ego are like a place of mutual respect. So then when you want to, when you have a dilemma and you need to decide something, your ego isn't going to object when you ask your higher self. You've been trying to find somebody, and then you're going to go to dinner with some friends, and they ask you, well, where do you want to go? And you don't really know, so you ask your higher self, this restaurant, no, this restaurant, no, this restaurant, yes. And so you end up at this third restaurant, and that's where the person you've been looking for is eating. So cool stuff like this starts to happen. And it's almost as if, I'm winning at the races, and I tell you, I've won 5,000, I've won 2,000, I've won 8,000. You want to come with me the next time I go? Of course you will. And what are you going to bet? Exactly what I bet. So the opportunity to connect at this level gives you the ability for your ego and your higher self to work together, because your ego now knows that your higher self has got the goods, even when you don't know why or how. And I've had some amazing experiences with my higher self that has given me information you could not possibly know any other way. And I'll give you an example, because I talk a lot about the dimensions in the book, and I explain that, there's multiple dimensions and how I experience them. But the very first time this happened to me, when my stuff disappeared, I asked, well, where did my sunglasses go? And my higher self would tell me, well, they're in a higher dimension. So initially I thought, well, we're all going higher dimensions anyway. We must be practicing. Maybe I'm sending myself ahead, like we send monkeys into space or something. So, but then one day, instead of asking, where did my stuff go? I asked a different question. But before that happened, I had an incident with one of my kids. And a 16-year-old son came in, put something in his backpack, came in the kitchen, gives me this story, and he said, here, I'll show you what I'm talking about. And he walks back to his backpack, opens it up to show me, and the thing he wanted to show me isn't there. And then he starts to pull everything out of the backpack, and he looks at me and says, Mom, I just put it here. And I said, I know, I saw you do it. And because I was in my own home, I didn't even think about it. I said, oh, honey, it's probably in a higher dimension. We'll just ask for it to come back. Now, can you imagine what my 16-year-old must have thought in that moment? And then he comes back in the kitchen. He tells me the story, finishes the story, and I say, and by this time he's put everything back in the backpack, comes back in the kitchen, finishes the story, and then I say, okay, now go back and look. And there it was. And that's when I knew I wasn't making it up. And then one day after that, instead of asking, where did my stuff go, I asked a different question. I asked, what's going on? And that's another piece of information that's very powerful, because of the 6 interview questions, what is the only open-ended question? Where, who, when, why, or how are all asking so you can solve the problem, so you can fix it. What doesn't do that? It simply asks for the data set. So when I asked the question, I was told, Maureen, you were in a higher dimension when you put it down. And that's why if you're in a higher dimension, when you set your sunglasses down, and then you come back and you think, oh, I gotta go back outside and take care of that. I didn't do such and such. I didn't roll up the car windows. So you go running out and you can't find your sunglasses. You grab your spare, you go take care of it. Now you're feeling better. Everything's cool. You walk back in, you reach to put your glasses away, forgetting that you are using your spare, and there's the original pair that you couldn't find 10 minutes ago. It is because your vibration is, again, shifted back up. And that's when I became aware of it. And I started asking my students, is this happening to you? And they all confirmed it. So I knew I wasn't making this up. And that's part of how I grew. Because I taught a workshop in a different city for almost 20 years every single weekend, except Easter, Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. So I was on the road in a different city teaching and sharing experiences, and then the experiences from that workshop would build for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So, at the end of that cycle, I had this huge body of knowledge built not only on my own experiences, but on the shared experiences of the people that I was working with that confirmed each other's experiences. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think those confirmations are really important, and not just that, but I mean, when you can share experiences and sort of, learn from other people's experiences, that's how we really make some progress. We can make things better, we can make it bigger, and not just get a bigger understanding, but an application to them. I think it's fantastic. Just going to take you back for a moment to the ego. A lot of people fear. It's almost as though there's a fear of the ego. We have to suppress it. We have to sort of push it into the background. And I can only imagine that if I were my ego, I'd get really, really grumpy. I get really, really grumpy if people kept pushing me down, saying you can't speak, you shouldn't think that way, things like that. But you're saying make the ego the partner. I think that is very, very powerful in sort of accepting that we are a little bit of everything. What do you think about that? I think
Indeed.
it's, I'm sorry, it makes me think of what you were talking about with the food. One negative, two positives. Maybe the negative isn't a bad thing. Maybe when you mix it with the two positives, it creates a bigger picture that's more balanced.
Well, I have thought a lot about what is the purpose of the ego. And I believe your ego is meant to keep you safe. It wants what you want. It got you here. It got you in a class with me, if you're in a class with me. So why would you consider your ego your enemy? It got you this far. And rather than look at it as the enemy, look at it as, well, it's working from a limited database. And the higher self has access to information that you and I don't know. And once you start to get the hang of that, and that happens with the 6 weeks practice, then you want to follow your higher self. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Early on, when I was working in the corporate world, I was trying to reach this guy who was a reporter for the newspaper. My job was to get my nonprofit agency get some publicity, and I had an agenda and a mission on this particular day and this particular subject. And I kept trying to reach this guy, and I couldn't get through, and I finally, let it go. And then it's getting close to 5:00, and I get a very clear message, call the guy now. And I thought to myself, no, man, I want to get out of here. Everybody wants to get home. Call the guy now. Okay, fine. So I call the guy, and he says to me, Maureen, how could you know that I would be here at this time? I'm never here at this time. So stuff like that starts to happen, and you realize your higher self knows what you want and knows stuff you don't know. And that's the cool thing. And I'll tell you one other thing, that this is a very dramatic story. My higher self I was in New York City. I was told by my higher self to book a workshop in September 2001. I had 2 huge classes, over 30 people. I was planning on taking a vacation day on September 10th, that Monday. And when I went to buy my airline ticket in August, just a few weeks before, I could not bring myself to buy the return ticket on the 11th. Certainly there were seats available, but it was a very strong feeling in my body and in my awareness. You can't do this. It's that sinking feeling you get when you play Monopoly, and you get that go straight to jail, do not collect $200, that kind of it's real easy to identify. I put it in common terms for people. They go, I know that feeling. I've had that. We've all played Monopoly. So I asked my higher self, what am I to do? Because I knew I wasn't supposed to cancel the class because there were so many people registered. I couldn't imagine that that's what Spirit wanted. It wouldn't have let me get that far. And my higher self was very clear and said, go home immediately. So I was on the first plane out of New York. This was before I ever lived there. First plane out of New York on Monday, September 10th, 2001, the year of 9/11. I was back in my home in Wisconsin at that point, when 9/11 occurred. Even though I had planned to be there. Even my friend said, why are you not staying? And my answer was, I don't know. But my higher self wouldn't let me buy my return ticket for Tuesday like I planned. So I got told I have to go home on Monday. So that's what I'm doing. And that's the kind of thing. You get to the place where you can trust. And you don't have to trust, you know. And what's the difference between trust and knowing? Trusting is, we trust that we're going to connect today and have this conversation. Knowing is knowing that the sun's going to come up tomorrow. Now, there's one other story I want to share with you that is totally mind-boggling. And as amazing as the 9/11 story is, I was driving my car from one major city in the Midwest to another. It was late at night, and a big semi tractor-trailer rig passes me. And, I don't like to drive that fast at night. And my higher self said, get up behind that vehicle and, get into the airfoil or the slipstream, as some people call it. Now, my kids taught me that that's not nice. People do that. The truck uses more gas, you use less. So I argued with my higher self. No, that's not the right thing to do. Is this my higher self telling me to get this close to the truck? Yes, now. So I did. Then we're coming up on the interchange where I'm going to change to a new freeway, and I'm wondering what's going to happen. The truck takes the same interchange. So I asked, am I to stay with the truck? Yes. The next thing that happens is the truck goes on the berm. And I ask again, am I supposed to stay with the truck? Yes, get behind it now. We're both going 60 miles an hour on the berm, and another car comes going the wrong way on that turn. And I was completely out of harm's way because I was hidden by the truck. And then when we come out of that turn and we're on the new freeway, I ask again, do I need to stay with this truck? No, you're fine.
Yeah. I was driving down a street here in Winnipeg, Manitoba one winter, and it was snowing and there was some construction in places on the street, and all of a sudden, out of the left side of my vision, in front of me, there was a bright purple glowing. And the glowing startled me, so I looked that way, and there was a huge sinkhole had just started. There was a sinkhole that my car would have fallen into, at least the tire on the front would have fallen into, and I avoided it because of that purple glowing. So, there's just, it's so important, Maureen, for everybody to share these experiences, to talk about these experiences, to try to understand them. They're really not that difficult when push comes to shove to understand, I think. Maybe at the time they don't make sense, but ultimately when they're things that are benefiting us and helping us, it's a really big deal. And I think so often what happens is people don't listen to that little voice. They've been, educated in many cases, in most cases, I would say, educated out of the instinctive information that's coming. And so to hear your experiences and hear you talking about the processes, absolutely fascinating and very, very helpful. One thing I wanted to ask you and mention is that you said try it for 6 weeks. Then there's an accuracy. It's so common in my experience to see people try certain things or try to trust in their intuition, and after they fail once or twice, they give up. Could you tell us a little more of the importance of trying it for 6 weeks?
Yes, I would love to do that. So this is a protocol that you commit to, and the protocol insists that you agree that for 6 weeks you will ask your higher self unimportant questions. The protocol includes 7 rules, and the 7 rules are, if you ask, you may not do it. So it's kind of like if I ask if I'm supposed to eat that bonbon, if my higher self says no, then I leave it alone. I don't make some dumb excuse, it wasn't really that clear. And so you follow the protocol precisely. but you're only asking about unimportant things. And the benefit of that is because I think about the ego as being like my number two. And I'm going to play here and say, okay, my ego is my number two. It's always giving me advice, telling me what to do based upon everything the ego knows. And it's always watching my decisions. But if I don't really care whether I have green beans or broccoli, then I can ask my higher self, because my ego doesn't really care. There are things in life that I really don't care about. Some days I don't care what I wear. Some days I don't really care about what I'm eating. Some days I don't care about whether I make a phone call now or later. So you start to ask only unimportant questions. For the 6 weeks, you only ask yes, no questions. For the 6 weeks, you're not allowed to ask predictive questions. It's always about you, and you're not allowed to ask, I'll call it second guessing, like why is this person doing this or something like that. No open-ended questions. So you're not allowed to ask anything that would require, a bigger response. And you perfect the yes, no. And what that does is give you confidence. Now, the problem that people run into is that if they're just trying for a little while, then they're testing to see if it works. I had an engineer call me one time and say, Maureen, it's not working. And I said, well, what are you doing? Tell me some of the questions you're asking. And he said, well, for example, on my way home from work, I'm asking my higher self if the light will change before I get to it. And I started to laugh and I said, well, Peter, you're actually, keeping, I said, you actually, want to know what's going on. He said, no, I really don't care whether I get home 5 minutes sooner or not. And I said, yes, but that's not the issue. You're keeping score. And he said, well, how else will I know if my higher self is right? And I said, that's the whole point. You have to go for a whole 6 weeks without knowing about whether or not your higher self is right, because it doesn't matter, because it's unimportant stuff. And at the end of the 6 weeks, you can look back and say, oh yeah, I did make some cool progress here. And the feedback on whether you're, quote, right or wrong is more about you getting something that you have wanted, but you didn't know either how to get it or you didn't know you were going to get it then or something like that. So the cool experiences occur as a validation in hindsight, but never in the front. So that experience of the 6 weeks gives you a sense of accuracy. And that accuracy then goes into what I would call open-ended questions. And then when an open-ended question comes, you can, or when an piece of information comes into your head, initially, a lot of people get good information and they think it's on their mind. They don't realize that they're getting higher self information. But if you have the ability to ask, is this my higher self telling me blah, 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 then, you'll know. And I'll tell you something else. When I first started developing this protocol, I was dating, and I went to this party and I met this cool guy that I liked, and I could tell he liked me, and I asked, if this guy asked me out, should I go out with him? And I got a yes. And so he did, and we went on the date. And the date was nothing. It was just flat. It wasn't good. It wasn't bad. And I knew I wasn't going to see him again. And I came home, and I stood in front of my altar, and I complained. And I said, what was that all about? That was a big waste of my time. And my higher self came in and said, you never asked. And I said, I did too. Oh no. You asked, but your lower self answered. You didn't ask your higher self. You just simply asked. And that's one of the problems people have. They don't think to ask by name. I had 4 sons. If I said, please bring me a glass of water, do you know I would never get one? It would only be if I would say the kid's name. And then it would come. And why would, if you have energies around us, and we all do, and, I have a little girl in me who wants to be special, the sexual energy running, all those different things, of course my higher self just isn't going to answer because I got, these other things in front of it. Because I didn't specify. So that part of me was right. I did want to go out with this guy. I did want him to be all over me. I did want to have a nice meal out. But in the scheme of things, my time was even more valuable than any of those. And my higher self would have known that and said, don't bother. And that's the cool thing. And it also works the other way. Sometimes you don't want to do something and you ask your higher self and your higher self says, yes, you should do it. And that happens to me all the time. All the time. One time my husband said to me, you know, we're going to LA for your friend's concert. I live in San Diego right now. And my friend was putting on a concert at the Los Angeles Museum. And we were going to go for an evening concert. So we were going to drive up and drive back. And he said, maybe we should go to this new museum called The Road. And I didn't want to do that because then we'd have to get up super early and it's a Sunday, you know, it's supposed to be a day to sleep in. But he said, why don't you ask your higher self if we should go? And so I did, and my higher self said, yes. All right. So now we're standing in line, and my husband looks at me and said, well, I'm going to go for coffee. And there's 3 lines, one long line of people that are going to get in for free, my line that people are going to pay for a special exhibit, and a third line of people who have bought tickets 6 months earlier before the museum had opened. So I'm just chatting up with people and talking to people, and this lady from the long line comes up and says, I have 2 extra tickets for early entry. Does anybody want them? And I looked around all the new friends I had made. Nobody said anything, so I said, I'll take them. And she said, oh, no. I want to give it to 2 people. And I said, oh, I am 2 people. My husband's just gone for coffee. So I get in line with them, and as I'm walking back to where their spot in line is, my higher self says, you need to talk to these people. So I start chatting with them, and then the lady says, here, you hold my ticket. I'm going to go up front and ask a question. So I'm looking at this ticket, and it's got their name on it. And their name is a long German name, very unusual. And I said, I know a family name with that name. Oh, but they're back in Ohio. And the man looks at me and said, we're from Ohio. And without skipping a beat, the older lady who was standing with them looks at me and said, are you Maureen? This lady was best friends with my mom when they all lived in the same city. They're still friends, but obviously they don't get to see each other very often because they don't live in the same city. And the last time she had seen me was 40 years ago at my first wedding.
Wow. You know what's really strange right now, Maureen?
What?
You know what's really strange right now? I've heard that story before, and it must have been from you, and I'm trying to figure out right now where I've heard you tell me that story. That is the strangest thing. I absolutely have heard that exact story before.
I have told it on the radio once or twice, so maybe you heard it with another speaker.
It must have been. It must have been you because it's perfect. That's fascinating. That's the way it should work. It's absolutely, yeah. JP's pulling the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and the best part is the daughter of the woman who invited me in now works for me in my New York office.
Wow. Yeah. See, that's the way things should work. That's the nature of things. That's the natural flow. And it's something that we just want to acknowledge and use rather than just, disavow, you know, and most people, I mean, so many people are not using these types of natural occurrences.
So let's go back to this higher self thing because I think it's really important. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is make these agreements with your higher self. You know, follow the higher self agreements for the 45 days of practice. Give yourself 45 days because at the end of that 6 weeks or the end of the 45 days, what happens is we have new DNA and we get to a place of authenticity that is so crystal clear, we don't have to trust it any longer. We know.
Right. There's a big difference there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a very cool protocol that I developed with my, working with my students. And initially, when I was teaching it, you know, I was learning myself. And that's the cool thing about all of these things that I write about. They're not just my ideas. These are things that I have experienced myself and with my students, and I have certainty about them, which gives the listener or the reader the ability to go, whoa, now I know what's going on. I'll ask you a question. Have you ever been at a traffic light where you're the third car back? And you're watching everything, you're in a mellow place, maybe you're listening to nice music, and the light changes and nobody moves.
Yep, often happens.
And then all of a sudden everybody moves. When that occurs, you're in 5D. You're actually able to see the reality in 5D, because in 5D you're able to see into 4 and 3. In 3 you're not able to see beyond third. So the people that are just in third and just locked into that polarity consciousness are reading the field in a time sequence that is behind you.
Fascinating. I can see what you mean in a psychic kind of way. I can see it's, when you're saying that, I can see that it's almost as if there's a time shift. There's almost like it's a different zone. It sort of goes slow motion almost. It's interesting when you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've discovered a lot of things about time, and time is not linear, of course. Most people know that. At least they've been told that. Whether or not they buy it or not, I don't know. But certainly people in our line of interest know, we've been told that time is not linear, but at the same time, we don't understand it. And I've been given a lot of information about how time works. And one time when I was teaching about time, and I was told that I would be channeling, and the students got ready for me to sit down and channel. The minute I opened my mouth, I was floored myself to hear myself say, "This is the Lords of Time." And I thought, oh my God, I never even knew there was such a thing.
Yes. That's wonderful. I mean, it's such a foreign concept to much of the population when you say things such as, you can shift your consciousness into different time periods and you're actually connecting to it. You can get information from different things, different places, even different worlds, different times, certainly. And it's really just with a thought. It's with the speed of thought. I don't know anything more powerful than this biological brain and the consciousness intertwined, right?
But I've also experienced time stretching. For example, I was in a situation where my son and I both overslept for an event that he needed to get to the bus in order to get to the airport in Chicago. And I woke up the exact time that the bus was supposed to depart from the bus station, which was 30 minutes away. And he still caught that bus.
Yeah. Again, a perfect application of this phenomenon that most people would disregard, right?
Exactly. Because, and here's the thing, this goes back to the very first thing I talked about, and that has to do with me discovering that I was uncomfortable around certain words. And that is, there's a lot of words that we use that are disempowering and take away our power. And the number one word is have to, or the phrase have to. I have to pick up my kids from daycare. I have to go see the doctor. I have to go to work. And if we were to eliminate that word, we would stop signing up energetically for mass consciousness. And the minute we do that, we step into our power. So we find new ways to express that. Maybe we say, I'm leaving now to go get the kids. I like being on time. Makes me happy and the kids are happy when I'm always on time. I don't want to get a late charge. Sometimes the phraseology has to do with the polarity, I don't like this, or this isn't any good, or, I think I'm right, instead to simply say this is a match. This isn't a match. Because that doesn't give any pejorative. It doesn't say that you're wrong and I'm right. It just means, hey, that's not a match for me. What else you got? So it changes the polarity because there is no being locked into that version of the reality. And when we consciously choose to stop using polarity words, we actually create, I'm so sorry, I didn't know that was going to happen. We actually create a way to step outside of this mass consciousness programming that's being thrust upon us.
Yeah, words and the double meanings and polarities. I mean, I think a lot of the time, people are repeating what they have experienced in younger life or through education or just living, and not really sort of assimilating or thinking themselves, so what does this actually mean, or what does it do? What does it do to my experience? What does it do to my life, to my emotions, to my feelings? So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of sense. On that note, I'm going to take this break, and we are speaking with Maureen St. Germaine and the 5D world. We will return after this. Don't go away. Thank you, and welcome back to Journeys. I am your host. I want to say your guest host, Tobias B. Harrell. Just a reminder to you that while Rebecca is away, she looks forward to connecting with you through her personal sessions, and while the classes that she had scheduled will be postponed temporarily, she welcomes you to book your session with her as they are available. And as always, I just spend some time on the West Coast, as I frequently do, but I'm back to my regular schedule, or as regular as it can be given the mystical and unseen worlds. And I always look forward to meeting you through many of the things I offer through my website. Of course, that website being etlanguages.com. ET, yes, as in extraterrestrial. And I also welcome you to take a look at many of the other resources pertaining to connecting the conscious and subconscious minds through the courses I teach around the world. And of course, Rebecca can be reached through her website, www.journeyswithrebecca.com. Next week, come back and join us again because I have New York Times bestselling author and entrepreneur John David Mann on the show. And not just that, which is very exciting to me, fascinating man, but I've also heard back from at least 3 or 4 other guests that were previously scheduled for this time period. And they have all mentioned to me that they would like to still come on as scheduled. So we will be looking very, very forward to that and many others to come as Rebecca returns in the near future. Tonight, I've been talking with Maureen St. Germaine, author of the new book, Waking Up in 5D, A Practical Guide to Multidimensional Transformation. Welcome back, Maureen.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, likewise. I've very much enjoyed it, and I know that all of our listeners out there are intrigued with this information because honestly, Maureen, there's a lot of information out there, and what you're doing so succinctly is sort of putting it into perspective in a real application type of way, giving tools. You know, everybody asks for tools. How can I do it? What should I do? And it's a really, really a valuable thing, so I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
And that's kind of what I see myself as, the person who will give you the tools so that you can do it yourself.
Yeah. Well, you refer to yourself as the practical mystic. That makes sense to me because without the practicalities, what else is there, right? We can talk and talk and talk, but if you can't put into practical application, then it's kind of just a vicious circle, isn't it?
It's certainly, a tease. Somebody else can do it and you can't. Yeah.
Absolutely. So tell me more about your life and your teaching and your students. Tell me more about different experiences. You just go ahead.
Okay. So, a story that I would like to share has to do with, some students that I worked with that were going to go with me on a trip to Tibet. And I was in the car with one of the people. I was sitting in the back seat and she was in the front seat and her husband was driving. And I said to this woman, did I ever tell you what happened to me in France when I was leading the Mary Magdalene journey? And she said, no. And I said, well, I had a past life death that I experienced. And I was driving a van with people in it, and we had come from a very sacred ceremony in the Cave of Bethany, a very sacred place. And I could feel my body in physical pain. And I asked what's going on, and I was dying. So I turned to the woman who was in the front seat next to me, and I said, I need to pull over. She said, well, just go ahead and pull over. And I said, no, I need a space where, both cars can pull over together. So we find that spot. I pull over and I go to the woman that I know can read the field on my body. And she scans my body with her hands. And she said, oh my God, you were stabbed. And I said, no, actually it was more like a sword. And so they energetically, pull the sword out of my body. And the very first thing that happened when I had this experience was, oh good, I get to die doing what I love. And then I thought, oh, those people that are traveling with me, how are they going to explain this? They're going to have a mess on their hands. It's kind of funny, you know. First, I'm happy that I get to die doing what I love, and then second one was this. And so, as I'm telling this story to my friend who's sitting in the front seat, and I'm describing the guy, you know, because the person who's scanning my body says, turn and look at him, the person who stuck the sword in you. And I did. And the woman in the car now, as I'm retelling the story, says, oh my God, I can see him. And I said, what does he look like? And she says, well, I see his steely blue eyes. And I said, yes, but it's someone we know in this lifetime. And she went, oh my God, it is. And I said, who is it? Because I couldn't tell. And she said, and this is classic for me and my students, let me check in with my higher self and see if it's okay to tell.
It's good to hear.
Isn't that funny? And
yeah.
So, you know, it must be somebody that was on the trip with us going to Tibet. So it was very interesting. And the story is longer and deeper, but the whole idea is that once you get in the habit of asking your higher self, you ask about everything. You get a piece of information about someone or something, you don't assume that you should tell them. You ask your higher self. And that's very powerful because there are times that you will get told something that you aren't supposed to carry forward. And you have to just sit back and hold space for that person. One time I tell about this story in the book, about how I was having these visions of my husband, being involved in a fatal industrial accident. And I finally said to him, after I had gotten clearance to tell him, you know, did you check in with your higher self about going back to that ship? He was a fire investigator and he was investigating a fire on a big freighter. And he looked at me and he said, well, if you told me not to go, I wouldn't go back. So I told him what I was seeing. And he says, well, you know, would you open up the Akashic Records for me tomorrow? And I said, sure. And now, if it were me, I'm thinking I'm going to ask questions like, is it my time to go? Can this be mitigated? You know, what else do I need to learn from this? But that's not what happened. We opened up the Akashic Records, and the very first question he said to me is, what caused the fire? And out of my mouth came the words, well, it was a cover-up, and there were actually 2 fires to cover up a couple of murders. And I went on to explain how it was a mob-related event and, you know, involving the merchant marines and a whole bunch of stuff. And I was so shocked that I kind of pulled myself out of that state. And I was kind of embarrassed because I don't think I'd been with my husband that long, maybe 4 or 5 years when this happened. And at the time, I thought I was making it up. You know, it's pretty wacky to tell someone this.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that my expectation was he was going to ask, is it his time to go? And so it was like completely off my, you know, awareness or expectation. And I said to him, you know, that's really strange since no one died. And he looked at me and he said, actually 3 people died. And so it turns out that the reason he was asking me that question is because as a scientist, there was no cause of the fire unless it had been set. So it was a very interesting experience, and those are the kinds of things that can happen as a result of your willingness, of a person's willingness to learn how to connect with their higher self and to learn how to open up the Akashic Records. And that's how come I've been able to get this kind of information. And here's another key for people. Even if you don't take the time to do these things, if you ask the question, what is going on? And we talked about this a little earlier. And you say, when something happens that defies the normal rules of, you know, logic or expectation, if you ask the question, what is going on? You will get the full Monty. You will get the full story. And you might not get it right in that instance, but you will get the answer. So the key is to stop asking, you know, who ate all the cookies so you could go yell at them, or why are the cookies gone? Well, we didn't put any fruit out. Or when did the cookies get eaten? Well, that means they're not going to eat dinner. You don't worry about any of that stuff because all of those other questions are taking you down the path so that we can solve something in our human way. But when we ask the what question, we're finally inviting the universe, our source, to tell us.
It's interesting. People forget to ask the questions, don't they?
Yes. Well, I honestly don't know. They ask me lots of questions, and it's gotten to the point where a lot of my students will just hang on every word, including even the social conversations at a meal or something, because they know I'll say something that even I don't know I know. Here's another thing that happens to people in higher, when you're in higher dimensions, simultaneously in the third. You could be having a conversation with someone and then answer their question. And they look at you and they say, why did you tell me that? And you'll say something like, well, you just asked me, blah, blah, blah. And they will say, no, actually, I didn't ask you. And, your eyes get big and your jaw drops. And then they say, well, I did think it. So you're tapping into their consciousness and answering a simple question because you heard them ask it. And in fourth dimension, you can hear it be asked. Here's another thing that's happened to me. And again, this is only in hindsight that I realized I was in fourth dimension. And that is, I finished working at my desk late one night, and I go upstairs to my bed, which is directly above my office, and the internet, a signal, followed me up the stairs. And I crawl in bed, and I feel like somebody's taken an open paperclip that's hot and stick it in my ear canal. And I jumped. It hurt so much. And I said, what is that? And I was told, well, it's the router signal. And I went, oh my gosh. So I got up out of bed and went back down to my office and unplugged the router, for our wireless, our Wi-Fi. So the next day my husband put our Wi-Fi on a timer. So think about how many, when you live in an apartment building, think of how many routers are crossing over your bed at night. Mm-hmm. And the way to know is when you open your phone to, hook into your router, and there's like 8 other choices, and you're thinking, holy smokes. So one of the things I teach people to do, a simple thing, is to ask for an energetic Faraday cage. And again, this happened because I'm so practical. We moved into a new house, and we couldn't turn off the router the way we were able to before. So I thought about it. I thought, well, how can I do a workaround? Well, everybody knows a Faraday cage. Maybe everybody doesn't, but a Faraday cage is an energetic metal grid that eliminates the ability of radio waves to come through a field. And there's stories, about how the American embassy in Russia was bugged and they had to put Faraday cage stuff on all the windows. And so, if you start to look at it, there's ways to understand it, but it's a metallic device, and sometimes a prison cell can be like that. There's lots of environments, you might be in your basement and you lose coverage. Any place you're at where you can't receive cell phone signal, you can pretty much assume is like a Faraday cage, even if it isn't, and it's named after a man by the name of Faraday. So I decided that I would call in an energetic Faraday cage around my bed to eliminate any EMF or any other energies that are inappropriate for human. And I found it to be very effective. So then I had a special group that I work with. I have a year-long training called the Ascension Institute. So I asked those people to do the same prayer. And these people, every one of their spouses were not in the program, but the spouses were saying, go ahead and do that. I want to try that, see what happens. And they all reported, all of the spouses and all of the participants reported that they had amazing rest and they were sleeping deeper than they ever were before. That's something simple you can do.
It's, again, just another couple of examples there of what we can do with our mind. It's always fascinating to me that we're pretty much taught when it comes to these types of things that imagination is simply imagination. Whatever you think can't really have an effect unless you take an action. But obviously in that case, in that example, it's a perfect example of creating something with your mind that has a real physical effect. There's no one that can tell me that it's not real, because once you think it, it becomes real. On some level, some dimension, it's real.
It's not just your mind, because
Right.
you're saying it out loud. So you're involving all of your consciousness and your physical form because you're using your mouth to say the words. So it's not just your mind. But your point is well taken, because it is through the mind that we grow our awareness of how very powerful we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're talking about the Akashic Records. It's interesting, the things that were going through my head when you're talking about that. A lot of people, ask questions about, oh, where are the Akashic Records? How do they work? Et cetera, et cetera. What is your experience with that?
I experience the Akashic Records as being in a dimension known as the 11th dimension. There are teachers that will say the Akashic Records are in your DNA. And when I asked in the Akashic Records, what's with that? I was told, well, compare it to, the big library and the local library. So a person's DNA can contain their Akashic Records, but the full record is in the 11th dimension.
Fascinating. Do you think, Maureen, that the Akashic Records are a different time and place? Or do you think they're a time or a place? Or do you think the 11th dimension is neither?
I think of the 11th dimension as neither. It is a vibrational environment that, first of all, the 11th dimension is not, the Akashic Records are not the only thing that's in the 11th dimension. Let's back up. Mm-hmm. And I believe that the Akashic Records were created after creation so that there could be a record that could be examined. I also experience that the Akashic Records can have more than one version of the experiences because the road not taken is taken as a subset and it's funded by you as long as you have energy to fund it, as long as you send energy to fund something. So you have more than one version of the reality. And the primary one is the one you're working with. And in the Akashic Records, you can change the past as well as the future. And you can do it through various tools, again, because the record is like a data set. And so the data set, we think about computers. So we think about RAM memory, and then we think about, the hard drive. And think of the hard drive as being the data set, and the RAM being the current data set that we're going to operate, right now. It's the close memory. It's the resident memory. And when we're in the Akashic Records, when we're working with the Akashic Record Keepers, we can actually go in and mine the deeper data and then change the past, which then impacts the present. And a lovely example that was given in the book is a story of a man who had a past life regression work, and he had a tendency to pick a fight. Now, this was not my project. This is something that someone else did, but one of my students told me of this work that she did. And she worked with this man, and it turns out that in a previous lifetime, he was his mother died, and his father and he started going to the bars for their meals, and he started hanging out with the people that were in the bars, and he decided he wanted to be a gunslinger like a lot of the people he had seen. And he would pick a fight with people and, win. And then one day he picked a fight with the wrong person. So he died at age 16. And from that point forward, even though he's an attorney in this lifetime, he was always picking a fight with people. And in that regression that they did, what happened is the man was given the opportunity to choose a different course of action. And he had been given an offer by an aunt from another city who taught the piano. And he went to live with her instead of hanging with his dad. Learned to play the piano, ended up playing in the bars, still hanging out at the bars, but had a different way of experiencing that. And he lived much longer, died of old age, at age of 57 or something. And then in this lifetime, his persona changed. And he wasn't as, itching for a fight like he used to be. It's quite interesting.
It is. It's very interesting because a lot of these things suggest that perhaps we can have an effect on reality in ways that we don't see with the eyes. I think that's obvious. But the thing is, do you look at these types of things as how would I put it, the manifestation? Do you look at it with, like going towards these things, such as you just described, different ideas of how he wanted to be or a person wants their future to look like? Do you think, how do you explain that it actually creates a manifestation? It changes the reality. Is that related to the Akashic records and how they're malleable?
Yes, well, that's a very good point. The Akashic records are a living field. Mm-hmm. So malleable would be an understatement.
Do they have consciousness? Does the Akashic records have its own consciousness?
No, but they're alive with our consciousness. It's kind of like, does the cells in your finger have consciousness? Probably not, but as a whole, yes. So the field itself is made up of all the experiences, and the experiences are alive. So if when we go into we say we go into the Akashic records, but that's kind of a misnomer. What we're really doing is going to the threshold of where the Akashic records are and meeting with guides who then pull the information we need, and we interact with that, and then we plug the data back in. So if you were to go stand in the Akashic records and, let's say, discover that the person you're married to murdered you in a past life, in that moment you might be filled with rage and outrage, and that would affect the field because it's a living field. So you wouldn't necessarily go into the records as much as you would be likely to be on the threshold working with guides and, pulling data and putting it back. Because it's alive, everything interacts with everything else. So that's why I think of it so much like a computer, because, our computers are pulling data and saving data, constantly updating and interacting with our information set that we're working with, even with our computers, writing a simple Word document. So it's more like that. And because of that, as it's being alive, you and I wouldn't really go into the records to observe something. We would ask the record keepers and the guides to support our experiencing it. Are you familiar with the science fiction thriller book Dune, or the movie?
A little bit, yes.
Well, in that storyline, there are these massive beings who are living, but people travel inside of them through dimensional wormholes because there's no other way to make that passage. So the beings move through the wormhole. It's a very interesting concept. And it kind of reminds me of that in the sense that there are some beings that are part of the Akashic records that are embodying the records. Then there's other beings that are assigned to that, and they perhaps serve for a cycle of time, and then they finish that term and they go do something else. So it's a very fluid environment, but it is a reflection of what's going on in the reality.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I could talk with you all day and all night. It's just wonderful stories and experiences and explanations. It makes perfect sense to me. A lot of people, it's really important for people that haven't had similar experiences to sort of reach out and grasp onto these, because sometimes that could be the sort of avenue that takes them towards it, right? Sort of opening our minds.
Exactly. And I'll share with you one other example that really brings it home. I was giving an Akashic Records reading in Asia with a client who was stubbornly resisting what the record keepers were telling her. And the short version is they were saying, you are looking at this information, this experience, as if you are somehow limited and you have complete power over all of it. And so you can act this way. You can choose how you want it to play out. You don't have to be the victim here. You can choose. And she kept resisting, and then all of a sudden, like a light bulb went off, like when we have those ahas, and she got it. She completely shifted at that exact moment. the whole room started to rock and sway. We were on like the 40th floor of a hotel, and the whole room moved back and forth. Now, when I'm in a foreign country like that, I'm working with the translator, and I build an energetic bridge between myself and the translator to my connection to the divine, so that they're receiving the information at the same time I am, and then they can translate in real time, and it's more likely that they'll get it, the translation, in a very accurate way. So I turned to my translator, and she nodded. She noticed it as well. After the client left, I said, check your phone. I want to know how big that earthquake was. Because I've been in earthquakes in Asia before on a high building, and the whole building like rocks and sways. There was no earthquake. And I asked, what was that if it wasn't an earthquake? It was a dimensional shift. This woman literally changed timelines from being in this poor me energy to an empowered person who was the queen, who had the ability to command what she wanted. She never perceived herself that way, but she was married to a wealthy man who had power and expected her to use her power, and she wasn't doing it. And all of a sudden it shifted. And that was a dimensional shift.
It reminds me of the film Doctor Strange. There's a lot of things in there that absolutely reflect reality.
I agree. Yeah. Great movie.
Oh, loves that movie. I absolutely love that movie. Because it's more real than what people think is real. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Maureen, how often do people ask you to check with your higher self? How often do people try to use your higher self instead of their own?
Well, in social experiences, when I'm with my students and we're out socializing, we might be playful with each other. One time I was with a group of students, and we were at Yellowstone National Park, and we'd been outside hiking around, and we'd done a special ceremony where we had activated some energies, and we came in. It was kind of late, a little bit after 1, and we were all really hungry. And there were some guys in the group and some women, and the guys immediately headed for the restaurant that was closest to the door we entered. And we got like within inches of the door of the restaurant, and I said, wait, did anybody check in with their higher self? And they all like were crestfallen. And so right away, because the guys were hungry, they said, we're not supposed to eat here. And I said, okay. So we went upstairs. Well, upstairs was this amazing room with big, big windows and an exquisite view of the gorge and everything there. And we asked, are we to eat here? Yes. And we went up to the front and asked, is there a wait? And they said, well, actually 10 minutes. Well, we ended up with the best table in the whole place. And we had this amazing view. And it was all because we checked in with our higher self. So yeah, sometimes people ask me, and I just turn it right back on them and say, well, what does your higher self say? I'll tell them what my higher self says, but I make them tell me what their higher self says first. And, it's a good thing to ask that question, because in my own work, for example, I ask my higher self about everything. I ask my higher self about when I was traveling and doing workshops in different cities all over. I would ask, am I to work with this host? Because I was always being asked to come to this city or that city by people who wanted to bring me. And one day we received an inquiry from a man who had an IONS group, International Noetic Science group. And that's a really nice group, founded by Edgar Mitchell. And he had, a lot to offer and wanted me to come. And whenever we get an invitation, we always check up and ask, higher self, are we to work with this person? Now, at that point, I can't think of a time that I was ever told no, but I still had this habit of asking. And so my operations manager in Calgary calls me and she said, did you see that email from that guy in Seattle? And I said, yeah. She said, did you check in on him? And I said, yeah. She said, what'd you get? And I said, I got no. What did you get? She said, I got no too. What do we do? And I said, well, let's see if it's no, not now, or no, never. Because in my mind, I couldn't imagine somebody who would want to host me who wouldn't be a good host. Yet we were being told no. So the answer was, it's no, not now. So she said, well, what do I tell them? And I said, well, our schedule's fully booked till December anyway. Why don't you just tell them that if we get a cancellation, we'll call him. Otherwise, he'll have to go on the books for next year. So that's what she did. 6 months later, I have a cancellation, and I go into meditation, and I ask, and I always ask 3 things. Am I to take a vacation? Don't work this weekend for a change. Am I to go take someone else's class? Maybe there's something I need to learn. Or should we move the class? And I was told, move the class. And it wasn't just move the class to another location in the same city. I was moving the Salt Lake City class to Seattle. And so I called my operations manager, and I said to her, I'm supposed to move the Salt Lake class to Seattle, but I don't know anybody in Seattle. She said, well, what about that guy? And I said, what guy? And she said, well, that guy. And she proceeds to remind me. And I said, well, do you still have that stuff? And she said, oh, yeah, I save everything. That's my husband. And why were we told not to work with him 6 months earlier? I was dating someone else, and so was he.
It was not the time.
Exactly. We were waiting for divine timing.
Yeah, because there is a right time for everything.
No.
And it's not always now.
Wait. No right and wrong. There is no right time. There's divine timing.
Yeah. Yep, I will go with that. Absolutely. Absolutely. The magic of divine timing. It's a beautiful thing. And it's something that people like to fight sometimes. No, I want it now. I want the answer now. I want the experience now. I want, this now. But sometimes if you listen to yourself, as you say, you might get the answer you do not want.
That happens plenty of times where we get the answer we don't want. And I think that there's a real opportunity to begin to understand that divine timing is very profound. When I was a child, I was given the opportunity to have one birthday party. And, I was from a big family. So, one birthday party in your whole life. That's it. So my mother said to me, we can have your birthday party on the Sunday that's closest to your birthday, but it also happens to be First Communion Sunday. And most of the kids have siblings that are going to be celebrating their First Communion. And we, I don't know what the attendance will be if you have the party on your the Sunday that's closest to your birthday, or we can wait another week, and then you'll probably get much better attendance. Now, I was 10 years old. What answer do you think I gave my mother? I'd been waiting 10 years for this event. Do you think I could wait another week?
Can't stand it. No way.
No way. And we had horrible attendance. And I still remember that moment. And the cool thing is, once we begin to recognize that there is a hidden benefit to waiting, and we're being given guidance to wait, there's all right, there's a silver lining here. I just have to discover it. And that's one of the things I do, when in the early years when I was very broke and had very, very little money, and I would get a bill for something that I had, like a advertising or something like that I committed to because I was, guidance was clear, but now I don't have the money to pay for it. I would look at the bill and I'd say, well, Spirit must know something I don't know because I don't know how we're going to pay for this, but I guess money's going to come in. So the benefit of working with your higher self is that you get the opportunity to do stuff you wouldn't do otherwise. When I first started out in my seminar business, I was told to buy advertising in a national publication. And the advertising was $250 a month. And at the time, it was a huge sum of money for me because I was barely making ends meet. But I also had a good job, and I could know that I'd have, more income in a pretty regular way. So I followed my guidance and committed. And then when my job went away a couple of months later, I was already committed to this and then plugged into it and could see the benefits so I could continue it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that is the practical in mysticism, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest benefit is that if people will understand that life is a bunch of experiences to expand the database of consciousness. And as we become more fifth dimensional, we become less and less needing to have the polarity experience. And that allows us to let go of the pain and suffering that has come with the polarity experiences.
Yes, I think the polarity experiences can sometimes mask so many other things that are so meaningful and can be so different, aren't they?
Yes. Third dimension is a polarity experience. Fourth dimension is a polarity experience. Fifth dimension, there is no polarity. So there is no right and wrong. And because we're plugged in to the divine at a certain level, we aren't as likely to hurt one another as we do when we're not plugged into the divine.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, I can absolutely relate with that. Absolutely relate with that. I like the way you put that. I'm going to ask you, I forget exactly how you used the term, but could you explain to me the sort of the workings of the chaos field, or however it is that you described when you were using the word chaos?
I follow the traditional scientific explanation of chaos theory, which the premise is that a group of dynamics can occur and they're feeding into a system changes that don't show up in the data set. And then one change changes everything. And the example is an avalanche that's started by a small rolling snowball, and the snowball gets bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden everything catches and the whole mountain of snow comes down. Or a simpler example is when children play a game of pick-up sticks. So imagine a bunch of sticks like chopsticks standing upright in your hand, and then you let them go and they fall, and then the game is the children pick up one stick at a time without seeing the pile move. And it is only when the pile moves that child then gets kicked out of the game. And the idea is to be able to continue to remove a stick from the pile without affecting the whole. But when the pile moves, that's a form of feedback. And that's called positive feedback. And negative feedback is when you're removing a stick and the pile doesn't move. So it appears that nothing has changed other than that one stick is being removed. So it's like a lot of things that we do in life that we're making a change, and we're looking for evidence of it. And it's not there. And then all of a sudden there's a big shift. And I think that's part of, when you begin to understand that chaos is a system and we just don't understand it, or we can't predict it, doesn't mean it's not a system. It is a system that allows for data to go in, and then one event triggers all of it. In the scientific world, for example, they actually call it a normal accident, for example, where there's a lot of little things that in themselves wouldn't be a problem, but, lining them up one after the other, there's a big event that causes a huge snafu. So, like a valve being closed off, and then the gauge on that valve being covered by a tag on a valve below it. It's complicated, silly little things, and then suddenly there's this huge event because of all these fail-safes that didn't get caught. Mm-hmm. So chaos is, in my mind, like that. We can have surprises in the reality that we didn't predict and didn't know, but we can use it to our advantage by holding outcomes in our awareness that accurately pull events to us, because an experienced event and an imagined event are the same in consciousness, because consciousness is the creator, not an outsider. So collectively, we're influencing it when we experience it, even in our awareness.
I often say, people say, oh, is that imagined or is it real? And my reply to that is always the same. It is, if you imagined it, it's become real. Because on some level it absolutely is.
That's well said. Very well said. Because an imagined outcome to the brain is not perceived as imagined. It's perceived as real. And, there was a great experience. There was lots of experiments done along this line. But one that I'd like to quote that's quite well known is a Russian experiment where a bunch of basketball players were asked to practice for an extra half an hour. And one group was told to do nothing as a contrast. One group was told to imagine that they were practicing their foul shot. And the third group was actually on the floor practicing their foul shot for an extra 30 minutes. So there was no change in the group that just, did nothing for that half an hour. There was a 25% improvement in their averaging scores of the group that was on the floor. The group that imagined practicing for the 30 minutes, 24% improvement. So it's almost indiscernible.
That's fabulous. That is really a fantastic example. Yeah. It illustrates the difference or the lack of difference between imagination and actually doing something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And that's why, when people want to manifest, instead of trying to manifest what you want, manifest the proof that you got what you wanted. So if you're trying to manifest a different car, instead of imagining that you have the car, imagine that someone sees you in the car and talks to you about, hey, I didn't know that was you because I didn't recognize your car. Are you in a loaner? And your answer is, no, that's my new car. That puts it into the reality in a way that is solid and real because you have a conversation in your head that feels real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Greg Braden. Greg Braden, he's done the Heart Research Institute, I think is what he works with. And it's all about, collectively getting together and changing the outcome of things. And he's had tremendous results in their science element of what they do. And, again, it's always fascinating to me because because these are typically, I want to put it in the right way here. These are so often the things that so many of us are not introduced to throughout our upbringing or our lives even. And yet they are such an integral part of existing and an integral part of succeeding at natural things. And it seems very much as though it's over time has been sort of bred out of us or educated out of us. And when we're talking about consciousness and subconsciousness and instinct and all of these things that you're so wonderfully describing to us tonight, I think that this is what we can look forward to, in practices and in consideration for making the world a better place. So I absolutely salute you with everything that you've done in the 25 years and the things that you've been discussing tonight. I think it's absolutely fantastic and it deserves much, much attention because, again, these are the things that can change our world. They are absolutely what can change our world and our lives.
Yes, and I love your phrase, bred out of us, because we have been led down a path to believe the matrix is real and to believe that things are the way they are because that's what we're being told. And little by little, people are waking up and perceiving things differently than what they're being told. And the more they listen to people like you, like me, the more they get it that they are right, that they are not making it up, and that it is real, and that we are powerful beings who are changing the reality. And, let's get with the program here. A new program, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating. Just this afternoon, I was talking with one of my students in Colorado, and the same subject came up. He said to me, I'm a pretty smart guy. I'm a very intelligent guy, but I've gone through my whole life basically feeling deep down there's something that I'm not getting to. There's something, that I'm not latching onto. I'm missing the information. I can sense and feel the truth my beliefs and things I feel deeply that are real or not real or et cetera, but I just can't arrive at the right information that I need to get to open up that world, to open up that consciousness and understanding to the next level. And I think that's why it's so important that people like you exist, because you're giving the practical applications, the practical practice. And I, you know what? I've done a lot in my lifetime and in my practices and in my teachings, and I can absolutely say everything that you've said about the consistency of working for 6 weeks with your higher self and different things relating to consciousness and subconsciousness, the sort of more subtle things. Absolutely spot on, and I absolutely love the way that you put things into perspective, and I think it's a very, very valuable time that we've had tonight. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I loved it.
It's been fun. Really
yeah.
fun.
And I'm sort of wrapping up. We're not out of time, but what happens is the end of the show, the music comes on and we have like 5 seconds to say goodbye. So what I'm trying to get to here is just to ask you a little bit about how people find you, where your book is available and your website.
Okay. So my website is MaureenSt.Germaine.com. MaureenStGermain. My books are available on Amazon and Kindle. You can also buy them on my website or bookstores everywhere. I also have lots of guided meditations that are available on CD Baby. The books are published in other languages. Also, I offer trainings that people can attend online. I also have lots of coursework that people can download and participate in. I also am going to be presenting at a conference in Las Vegas, a consciousness conference put on by In5D Events. And that's coming up in October 20th through the 22nd. Then I'm also going to be at Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles. And let's see what else. I'll be presenting a training in New York City at the Edgar Cayce Center, where I'm on the board of directors, and it's a fundraiser, and I'm doing a day-long program on waking up in 5D. It's actually called Breaking Out of Your 3D Matrix and into your 5D expression.
Wow. Sounds like you are a busy lady. What are you doing before Christmas? I mean, the couple of weeks before Christmas, will you be anywhere?
I'll probably be at home in San Diego. And I want to give our listeners, some tools that they can take away right away. And one of them is that tool. I am asking for a day of heaven on earth for me and everyone I come in contact with and everyone I have a contract with. And what that does is elevates everyone I'm about to talk to, everyone that I'm about to work with. And it helps me. That's one tool. And then another tool you can use is when you go to bed at night, in addition to asking for that energetic Faraday cage, you can announce, I am waking up in 5D.
You know, that's a beautiful way to put that. That's a beautiful exercise. Think of how many times people that are older usually look at the children and say, you're making a wish, and in their heads they think that's so silly. That's not silly. You make a wish. You just made a wish. You just described making a wish for heaven on earth and in the lives of people. And I'm telling you, it's a very powerful thing. That's a beautiful thing. Beautiful. Just absolutely beautiful.
I'll tell you how that came about. Again, these are all experiences that I learned from my experiences. So they're tools that I learned through my experiences. I was getting off of a plane, and the lady who knew me and was handling the baggage spoke to me, and I was on my way home to turn around and come back to the airport. So she said, how are you? And I said, well, I'm having a blank day because I've got to get back here in 3 hours. And she looked at me kind of funny because that's not typically the way I speak. And I was horrified that these words came out of my mouth, so I tried to correct it, and I said, but I'm having a day of heaven on earth because I'm flying with United. I went home and there was an inch of water on the floor of my basement. There was water running, but we couldn't figure out where, and it turns out that it was between the walls. I was living with a roommate who could hear it, but didn't do anything about it. So the plumber came when he was supposed to. My neighbor came to help. I was able to repack my suitcase. I was able to reorganize my flight. I was even able to go to the bank and make a deposit and drop a bunch of postcards. And the phone is ringing when I get back, and it's United saying, the flight that we have going through Chicago is running an hour late, both of them. We're wondering if you could take the earlier flight, which is now only 1 hour late. And I said, actually, I can. My suitcase is already in the car, and I'm only 15 minutes away. I'm sitting on the plane, and I'm thinking to myself, that was amazing. All that drama, and yet it all got handled. How cool is that? And I said, what's going on? Remember that phrase? And my guidance said, well, you asked for a day of heaven on earth. And I thought, oh my gosh, next time I have a lot going on, I'm definitely asking for that again. Well, the second time I asked for it, it occurred to me I didn't have to wait till I had a lot going on. I could ask for myself every day. And so can you.
Yeah. Absolutely. When you were in Yellowstone, did you see the caldera?
Oh, yes. And actually, I misspoke. When I described the storyline, I was actually at Banff because that's where that gorge is. But I've been to Yellowstone so many times because I used to live in Montana. So, anyway, yeah, I saw the
Oh, were you at Lake Louise?
Yes, we were at Lake Louise.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
It really is.
Absolutely beautiful. And I was actually just in Calgary 2 days ago. And, you were talking about Edgar Mitchell, and he was also one of the founders of the organization Free with Mary Rodwell and some others. I think, it's very interesting how these things come together and come up in certain conversations. I think it's a cool thing.
That's very interesting. I didn't realize that. I knew he founded IONS, but I didn't know Free.
Yes, he was part of that. He came in at the beginning of that and agreed to be a part of that because it was a good cause and it was important to him given his experiences that he had had, I think, in space. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. It's really great. You know, I could talk and talk. I love I'd love to hear more about your Ascension Institute. I would love to hear more about your practices when you're doing I forget what you called it, but we're doing things in Tibet, or you're doing group meditations, things like that. It would be fascinating to hear more of that sometime. We'll have to get you back on the show because we're going to run out of time. But tell us about the Ascension Institute. You said you had a 1-year program.
Mm-hmm. It's a year-long program that people take, and I work with people every month. We do quarterly meetings where we have in-person and trainings. And I take people deep, I take them far, I take them further than I take people in their normal trainings with me.
Wow. And I hear that music. That means we are at the end of our time together. Maureen St. Germaine, you are a practical mystic, and I've very much enjoyed talking with you. Thank you very, very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody, see you next week. And have a great week until we see John David Mann next Monday on Journeys with Rebecca.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
And that's us.
There we go.